It was amazing.
Hi everyone, we're going to get started back again, and I want to introduce Noreen Naseem Rodríguez, who's an assistant professor of elementary education and educational justice in the Department of Teacher Education and core faculty in the Asian Pacific American Studies and Muslim Studies program at Michigan State University. She is the co-author of Social Studies for a Better World, an anti-oppressive approach to for elementary educators with Katie Swall, and Teaching Asia America in Elementary Classrooms with Anne and Kim. Before becoming a teacher educator, Noreen was a bilingual elementary teacher for 9 years, and she's going to share her project that's most recently funded by the Spencer Foundation, called Creating Transformative Possibilities in Schools and Communities Through Asian American Studies. And as you know, I've told Noreen this, I've got a particular interest in sort of working with teachers and children in Hong Kong and Singapore. And I find this project absolutely brilliant. So Noreen's going to share an overview of it with us today. And I'm going to move the slides. I hope I can do as good as Auntie Kathy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Noreen.
We can go to the next slide.
All right. Wait a minute. I'm going to go down here. No, it's not going to the next one. But shall I use this one? Oh, I didn't.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that I acknowledged the complete research team. I'm working with 5 fantastic colleagues from across the United States who have a range of expertise on this project that is going to be a longitudinal effort over the course of 5 years. So next slide.
Oh, hang on. I'm not on a Mac, Noreen. I'm struggling. Oh, no, but there should be a map of America next. Hang on. Didn't I need to go back one? That one. There it is.
Okay, our colors are a little hard to read, so I apologize for that. I think somehow the text got a little murky there, but for this particular project, we're trying to understand the ways that Asian American studies mandates in various states with distinct political contexts are implemented in K through 12 classrooms. And so I've noted here on this map states that we are studying in red and blue. And the blue states are those that are Democratic-led political leadership, and the red states are Republican-led leadership, which will become important in a moment. But we can start in the middle. IL stands for Illinois, which was the first state to pass a mandate requiring the teaching of Asian American Pacific Islander histories in 2021. While many people said that that was in response to the rise in anti-Asian and anti-Asian American racism, discrimination, and violence. Several people have been killed. They were actually working on passing this legislation years before the pandemic, but the shooting of several Asian immigrant women in Georgia in March of 2021 really spurred the process and allowed them to pass it much more quickly after that happened. And so that mandate is currently in effect. And so teachers are supposed to be following that mandate and teaching at least 1 unit of instruction during each academic year. Shortly after Illinois passed what is called the TEACH Act, New Jersey followed suit with very similar legislation requiring 1 unit of instruction related to Asian American and Pacific Islander history. And this is the 2nd year of implementation in the state of New Jersey. So that effort is a little bit different because the Illinois efforts were heavily funded by a couple private foundations that really offered a lot of support for both university and state level partnerships. And they also worked very heavily to create curricular resources. New Jersey, on the other hand, did not get that level of outside funding from private foundations. And so it's mostly a grassroots effort of various nonprofits and community organizers who are working to develop lesson plans, support teachers in learning the content knowledge that they are not getting from their own school districts or in their teacher preparation programs, and then kind of building these cohorts of teacher fellows that can then create professional development opportunities at their own school districts. Moving down south, we see FL for Florida. Florida is an interesting case, and I'll talk about Florida and Texas specifically in a moment, because Florida's leadership has taken a very strong stance against many marginalized communities. An advanced placement African American studies class at the high school level was banned across the state, and there have been very hostile toward LGBTQ students. And so, in the wake of those very aggressively anti-diversity, anti-equity efforts, they still managed to pass a state level mandate about the teaching of Asian American and Pacific Islander histories. So it's a fascinating context, and the more we learn, the more we've discovered that it's not really a result of community efforts, but rather one single organization that really pushed this through without community buy-in, which is fascinating to us as researchers. And then if we go back to the middle, TX stands for Texas, and that is my home state. It's a complicated place. Both Texas and Florida are in the American South, which is the region of the United States that has the fastest growing Asian American populations. Texas is no different. And in 2022, the various folks across the state, including some nonprofits and community organizers, attempted to pass an Asian American Studies elective by the State Board of Education, and they, due to a very hostile political climate, postponed that vote until this year. But there is a way that they can circumvent the State Board of Education approval process by developing what they call a pilot course. And so that was actually underway for the first time last year. And so Texas is working on having some sort of state level requirement, but in the meantime, there are grassroots efforts to get Asian American Studies courses developed where there is support at the district level. And then our final site is California, which passed an ethnic studies graduation requirement for high schoolers in 2023, which includes but is not exclusive to Asian American studies. And so California is distinct from these other areas in that ethnic studies is a high school requirement, which as a research team we thought would really mean that that's the strongest example. But the more research we've been doing this first year, we've learned that there are some districts that are completely refusing to offer ethnic studies because the mandate at the state level, while a mandate, is unfunded. And so if they don't have the funding support to prepare teachers, they are essentially opting out of having to do an ethnic studies offering. And there's no accountability at the state level that's particularly meaningful in terms of enforcement. So in terms of the larger project, like I said, it's a 5-year longitudinal project. This first year, we're in the midst of just looking at the various policies at each state, establishing connections, meeting teachers, doing some initial site visits, really trying to build goodwill and trust with folks so that in the next 2, possibly 3 years, we can engage in heavy data collection, which includes classroom observations, interviews, focus groups with students, and we weren't expecting this, but we've actually been doing a lot of professional development workshops as well, both leading and observing them. And then in year 4, we're really excited to have an opportunity to bring people together. So we're actually going to be holding 2 in-person summits. One is exclusively for the youth that we're working with in each state site. So the goal is to bring together youth and their adult chaperones together in space so they can talk about what it means for them to experience Asian American studies in K through 12 settings, and to offer advice for teachers who want to engage in this work but don't know how, to talk about how it changes them as people who are often seen as not American, as other, and just the different things that learning about Asian America means to them in terms of developing their critical consciousness. And then in that year, we will also have our first of 2 summits with teachers. So our goal is to bring together teachers from across these states to share their practices, to talk through what is working, what resources are most helpful, how they've been able to promote or whether they're able to or not. You know, in some cases, we have only one teacher per district teaching these classes, but really just give them some space to be with each other and think through their struggles as well as their successes. And then in year 5, we will have a second larger teacher summit that will hopefully engage even more teachers and perhaps bring some people in who hadn't taught Asian American studies up until the past year. So we're very enthusiastic about what we've been seeing. However, you know, there are certainly challenges, many of which have presented themselves since our new president took office. So you can go to the next slide.
Oh,
okay. All right, this one is hard to read, but basically on this slide, I wanted to share some of the different approaches that folks have taken in terms of teaching about Asian America. That first one that's very difficult to read is multicultural education. I'm sure you all are familiar with that from the 1990s and how, in many cases, it ends up being a very superficial approach to teaching about non-dominant groups, particularly through things like food, fun, and festivals. That is something that is still occurring today. And so when we ask people who have no training in Asian American histories or cultures to talk about Asian America, it often comes down to celebrations, often religious ones, and very we'll make a craft. So rather than really focusing on the meaning of Lunar New Year, we're simply going to make a dragon puppet and then we're done. Check, I've met the mandate. The second common approach that we're seeing is the inclusion of Asian American histories and or cultures, but Eurocentrism is still what is in the focus. And so often it's more of a supplement or just a quick mention of contributions without any meaningful in-depth work related to Asian America. And typically these things are happening in US history or literature settings, and it's often not through the voices and experiences of Asian Americans. The strongest model that we are seeing is what we would consider traditional Asian American studies or ethnic studies, with a clear focus on centering those voices and experiences of Asian Americans, their identities, issues related to power and oppression, as well as resistance and solidarity, agency, and being in community with other groups. Thank you. Okay, here we go. So this is basically building on what I previously said in terms of thinking through the ways that it can be done very superficially, or there could be more meaning to it. Actually, we can move on to the next slide
Okay.
since graphics are a little weird.
Yeah. Hang on. Not. There we go.
Okay. So in terms of some of the things that we've observed thus far, just, 9 months into the project, we know that most teachers in the United States have never experienced Asian American Studies coursework. They likely haven't done any readings, and they haven't received professional development in the vast majority of states and school districts. And so, as we hope to push folks toward more critical approaches, we know that that takes time, that takes expertise. You have to have content knowledge. And so, at minimum, we're hoping that over the course of this project, we start to observe some growth and positive outcomes for both students and teachers. And while I described multicultural education as typically very superficial and sometimes problematic, we have seen some people take that approach and do it in really powerful ways. We've seen people teach about Asian American histories in ways that are very problematic, where they're actually still sidelining it very much, and they're only offering a very small snippet of what's happened in the past, or only offering a single perspective. And we've also seen it taught really beautifully in ways that are very dynamic, that connect to other racial and ethnic groups and time periods. And yet we have also seen Asian American studies classes taught in ways that are also not particularly inspiring, where they take a chronological approach, which is typically not what people do with Asian American or ethnic studies, and don't necessarily have a whole lot of passion or criticality in it. Yet, when students take these classes, oftentimes this is the first time they've been exposed to Asian American content. And for the Asian American students in those rooms in particular, it is always deeply meaningful, impactful to them. As I mentioned with the California example, we've also learned that legislative mandates are not necessarily the answer to more inclusive curriculum, because teachers are already doing a million things, and having an additional requirement on top of that, for which they have no resources, makes it pretty impossible. And so we understand the many demands on their time, and at this point, we're just trying to engage with the teachers that are trying, because we have the resources to support them, but it's really the self-motivation more than anything else that we're noticing gets people to actually start doing this work and meeting those mandates. We can go to the next slide.
Do you want me to go on to the next one?
Yes, please.
The last one.
And so I mentioned some unexpected challenges, particularly with our new president. So Texas and Florida have very, very conservative political leadership that has basically, in the last several years, decided that talking about race, teaching about race is harmful to white students, despite the fact that in both states there are very large populations of people of color, of immigrants, and they have both passed laws banning what they describe as critical race theory, but by any definition of critical race theory that's based in facts, that's not what it is. They have prohibited what they describe as, quote, divisive concepts. And so, because there is this state level legislation about what teachers can and cannot teach, teachers are afraid. And so it's really hard for us to find teachers that feel comfortable letting outsiders come into their spaces. That being said, there's an incredible Vietnamese dual language program in Austin, Texas, that I think could be perceived as a site of Asian American studies, although heavily focused on Vietnamese Americans. And so there are some spaces that we will continue to explore, but the climate in those two particular states is very, very hostile toward teachers, just broadly speaking, and particularly teachers who are dedicated to serving all of their students, and embracing all of their various identities. And in the last couple of weeks, things have become even more stressful because our current president has released a flurry of executive orders, including the one that I have screenshot for you on the right, that is aiming to supposedly end racial indoctrination in K through 12 schooling. I'm sure all of you know that educators are certainly not indoctrinating children. We can barely get them to follow directions consistently sometimes. So it is certainly like radical indoctrination is not something that we are actively doing because there are lots of other things that we are trying to do first. Yet, this is yet another thing that is terrifying teachers, school district leaders, and administrators. So we're in a very terrifying moment, I would say, for public school. The president is threatening to dismantle the Department of Education, which would end services for students with disabilities, who don't speak English or who are learning English. There's just a whole mess of things that are making education in the United States very, very fraught right now. So with that, I'm happy to take any
Yeah.
questions that you
Thank you, Noreen. Thank you. I'm just going to ask Finn and T, can we go to have Noreen on the screen now, just her face and take the PowerPoint down? Yeah, stop sharing. Oh, that's easy. That's easy. Yeah, that was very simple. I can do that. Yeah, thank you. Get rid of that. Oh, no. Sorry, Noreen, we're just technical things here a minute. Nearly there. I had her there for a second. Oh, there we go. Let me go back to her. Oh, there she is. Thank you so much. It's such a challenging time for you in the United States at the moment, with your unexpected challenges. But and the context of that is so significant to the work that you're doing. And so I just want to understand the context a bit better. So the states you identified are ones where within social studies, the ethnic studies, these are Asian American communities, and that's sort of the curriculum. So in another area, it might be a different cultural group. And the curriculum for that, is that driven by the teachers or the state or the local community, the types of things they do in elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools?
So in each of these states, there's a range of different mandates. And so, for example, in California, it's an ethnic studies mandate that includes African American studies, Asian American studies, Native studies, Latin studies. New Jersey and Illinois both have diverse and inclusive history mandates that also go across those different ethno-racial groups. Florida is interesting because I think technically it has them, but people don't necessarily follow them. And Texas doesn't really have mandates like that, but it has very intensive state standards that people are supposed to follow that do include members from each of those groups. So, just that point of clarification regarding the mandates. Now, in terms of curriculum, that's really the part that has grown tremendously since the pandemic. So, one organization in particular, the Asian American Foundation, has heavily invested millions of dollars in developing lessons and offering workshops and even paying teachers stipends for taking professional development workshops. And so they're probably like the largest player in the United States, but there are many other organizations that have been working toward creating curriculum. But really, I think the challenge is teachers don't know where to fit it in because
Mm,
the curricula that they've been provided is not something that is deeply integrated into whatever the scope and sequences are provided by their district.
mm.
So they're trying to squeeze it in where they see fit, and in many cases, they don't really know where to do that yet.
But the sort of overall arching thing here is that the Asian American students in these areas have like that sense of belonging and purpose, and they can see themselves in the curriculum and the things that they're learning. So then, will the data you be collecting will be like sort of classroom ethnographies and maybe some and getting the voice of the children there, the students, I should say.
Yes.
Yeah,
Our big goal, and this is more long term because obviously when you do
yeah,
research in schools, it's complicated, right? And you don't
yeah.
really start with the
Takes a
students, you really
while.
have to start with
Yeah,
everyone above them, right?
yeah.
But really, we do want to be able to really capture how students experience this. And then the beauty of being funded for a longitudinal study is we want to be able to talk to these young people over time. So maybe they take
Mm,
an Asian American Studies class next year, and that's where we meet them. But we don't want the conversations with them to end there. We want to continue to see how what they learned in Asian American Studies classes impacts what they do in the future. Does that continue to build their critical consciousness? Is that something that leads them to take more action in their own communities? Are they going to encourage their peers to take these courses? For the students that are taking this in high school, how does that impact what they decide to major in when they go to college? We really are excited to learn about all of the possibilities.
mm.
And that's why this Vietnamese dual language class is particularly compelling to me because that is pre-K through fifth grade. So
Oh,
we're
wow.
really seeing students developing a strong sense of what it means to be Vietnamese American, but also in those classrooms, it isn't only Vietnamese American students.
Mm, yeah.
So while we all obviously deeply care about the impact of this on Asian American students, we also know that it's going to be good for all students to learn about
Yes.
more communities.
I'm going to look around the room and see if people have got questions for you. Angela Malloy Murphy's got one for you. She's from the University of Melbourne here with us. And do we need a microphone? Oh, yes, we do. So you can hear her, Noreen. She's here in the front. If you can't hear, shout out.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear her?
A little.
A
A
little.
little. I'll be louder. Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if you feel that your research might be coming under fire given the new administration, and why or why not, and what you think about the future of research like this.
Mm,
We get news over here. I know I have American colleagues and funding has been cut already in some ways, but I'm really curious about yours in particular.
did you get that, Noreen? I can sort
I
of do a
did.
synthesis if Angela will let you. Basically, you know, building on your last slide, really, what are the challenges now, and where do you see the future of research like yours going, given the sort of current, well, the dire challenges, and into the future, who knows what's next?
I mean, first and foremost, bless the Spencer Foundation who funded this project because it's a private foundation. So unlike folks that are getting federal research money, we are not in danger. And Spencer very much understands the very difficult nature of doing research in the current moment. I actually met with our program officer yesterday, and they don't mind that we have to pivot for certain things. So I talked to our program officer about how it's been very difficult to get teachers to even respond to us via email because they're terrified of getting freedom of information requests from
Yeah,
any number of people who might view what they're doing as potentially dangerous for children, even though this is obviously in the name of offering more diverse and equitable accounts of history to children, but obviously it's being framed in very different ways that are super distorted and disturbing. But um,
yeah,
I
that's what
suppose,
Mariana was saying, that people in year 4 of their project have had no funds coming in year 5, so at least you're free of that. But then the impact on the teachers and the students and their families would be significant for you.
yes, and we are being really intentional about building strong relationships. So in places where we're not able to get direct access to classrooms, we're trying to offer professional development because we are there to support the implementation of state level mandates. And in many cases, these school districts don't have access to professional development, certainly not free or highly discounted. So we can offer that. And then the teachers that are invested and want to learn more, we're hopeful that perhaps, in the future, as we start to build more relationships, they'll want to participate. But we're also already being very mindful of the fact that we're going to have to really protect people's identities and make sure that we use as many pseudonyms as possible. Even when people say it's fine for us to use their real names, we don't want to do anything that might make people targets for the trolls and just, the
Yes.
people firmly disagree with what we're doing, even though we know that this is for the benefit and health of our democracy.
Mm. And on the bright side, your work will show the way that it does, have an impact, and it can be like a flagship, I guess, for that, and sort of the sort of positive side of it, rather than focus on the sort of more negative side. Have we got any? Sorry, go on.
This is not particularly proper for me to say, but I do think it's a sad reality. Unfortunately, in the United States, the sites where you see the greatest pushback against anything related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is going to be your predominantly white spaces. And so in areas where it's predominantly Black and brown students who are in the classrooms, there is a lot less fear.
Hmm.
So there's that. And then we're also, 3 of our 5 sites are in Democratic strongholds at the moment, at least. And so in California, Illinois, and New Jersey, there is state level leadership that is absolutely not going to back down and change these efforts to diversify the history curriculum. So at least there's that. Texas and Florida are a bit tenuous, but the other 3, we feel confident that we can do some classroom work without a whole lot of fear.
Such important work, Noreen. I'm just looking around the room. Are there any other comments or questions? Or yes, Kate at the back.
You can translate it if I don't.
We're just getting a microphone to Kate, and I might have to.
I just want to send a message of solidarity, which I think we need to do with all of our American colleagues, right? Given the pressures that you're under. As someone who has lived and taught in the US, I have my own concerns around my own data usage right now, including my children's, students in the Department of Education. So I realize that all of that is also weighing on all of us. So just a message of solidarity to keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you heard that. That's good then. Thank you, Kate. I'm looking around the room because I just wanted to say too a message of solidarity, but thank you for your generous time in sharing your work. We look forward to hearing about it and reading about it in the future, and how you overcome these adversities with your brilliance and enthusiasm, and we look forward to seeing what you're going to do. So thank you so much for doing this, Noreen. And I'm sorry that we had that slight problem with the whole thing at the start, with the voice coming in on the roof on top of us. But no, you were wonderful. Thank you so much. We're all clapping here. We hope to catch up with you in person. Thank you so much. Take care. And it's 8:30 there now, right? So you can have a cup of tea.
You can go to bed.
Yeah. Too early, Noreen. Too early. That's my bedtime. Okay. Thank you so much.